Bonjour, bon matin.
Good morning.
Nigawi maniruk. Kwedne no dini kwendishnakas, mekanaki kwendishnakas, mainganandodem. I'm so happy to be here this morning. Ça me fait tellement plaisir de voir vos beaux visages.
It's wonderful to see your faces and to participate in a discussion that is really going to nourish our future. I'd like to thank the elder for the prayer this morning and the song, because I think this really started us off on a good footing, and also for his comments, because I think, as with Deborah, there are a number of things that I'd like to build on. It was mentioned this morning that this is a historic site. This is this station that is the gateway to the west. And Deborah also mentioned that we have to talk about many histories, but I'm going to tell you, and she gave a couple of histories of this area.
Even like this place here, it has multiple stories to it. It is multiple places. We're in a train station, as I said, the opening to the west of Canada. This was one of the reasons treaties were made in this territory, is because we wanted to open up the west, and there was a recognition that we needed permission from the Indigenous peoples of this territory in order to put a railroad through this territory. We're also right by the Forks, which is an ancient site of gathering for Indigenous people, a place of trade and commerce, a place of alliance, political alliance, gathering, and a place of travel also. Our highways as we know them now didn't exist 150 years ago. Our highways were our rivers. And so we're at the place where two rivers meet, and two very important rivers in terms of travel into Western Canada and travel up north all the way to the Hudson's Bay. We're also at a place where just across the street we have a historical fort, Upper Fort Garry. It's the place where Manitoba's entry into Confederation was solidified. It's the place where the resistance took place, began. And, you know, I mention all of those things because I tie these stories to why I'm here, and because of my ancestors' presence in this territory, and the importance that their actions have on us today. You know, I speak about the Upper Fort Garry because my great-grandfather stood as the primary security guard at the front gates of that fort during the resistance and assured security for the Métis that were inside conducting the political events. Louis Riel is my great-uncle and fought very hard for some of the reasons that Deborah mentioned today to ensure the protection of fundamental rights of the citizens of this province. And I think, you know, something else that was mentioned this morning is that we don't really know our history. We don't know our stories. And I hope that 2017 is a moment in time where we can pause and reflect and share our different perspectives of our different stories. Because, and elders will tell this, and it's very important to Indigenous teachings, there isn't one truth, that every person lives their truth. And in that, we live our stories and our interpretations of stories. I'd like to today share one story that has multiple interpretations, different views, and you'll see from that how we really have some continuing work to do that flows from that. And tying to all of that, why would we look into the past? Why not just focus on the future, which is a common message, and one that I often expect the students that I lecture to, and I sometimes speak to kindergartens and grade 1s and grade 2s, and I also lecture at the university. And they will remind us that we can't just look into the future, that we do have to look into the past. And Indigenous people are guided by this concept of 7 generations. I'm sure many of you have heard that. If you can give me a nod, I'll know that you're actually still awake. Okay, thank you. So 7 generations, that's a concept of looking forward in our decision-making 7 generations into the future. So if we speak of the things that have happened in this territory and where we've had to look 7 generations forward, in Riel's actions and in the Métis governance structure, and in the call for not only annexing Manitoba as a territory under the decision-making power and authority of Canada, but rather as an independent equal participant in Confederation as a province, Riel had in mind 7 generations forward. You see that even reflected in the Manitoba Act. and the 1.4 million acres of land that were set aside for the children of the Métis. This is not just about securing an immediate participation in the nation for the Métis of the Red River, but rather for ensuring a future. And it's very visionary. So they were thinking of us 7 generations forward. Now it's our turn to look 7 generations back to inform what it is that we're talking about today so we can have an informed discussion. And that's part of my vision for 2017, and my main message to you today is not to be too focused on right now, nor to be too focused on the future, but to acknowledge our past and remember our histories and understand our histories and understand the multiplicity of histories so that we can make that informed decision-making. I'd like to direct you to an image that will be shown on the screen, hopefully. It's a good thing I'm not in charge of technology here today. And this is an image that is the cover image of the book that Geneviève so kindly spoke about this morning. And it represents the treaty. And the book is called Breathing Life into the Stone Fort Treaty, an Anishinaabe Understanding of Treaty 1. And the book is really focused on looking at an alternative understanding of the treaty, not to relive or to modify the treaty, but to give life, to breathe life into what is essentially a relationship that was confirmed in 1871, right in this territory. My math is horrible, 142 years ago now, 1871. Where our ancestors sat and they discussed with the representatives of the Queen how we would live together on this territory. A lot of pressure to enter into treaty negotiations. As I mentioned, the railway was coming into Western Canada. People were settling in the province. The Métis had just entered into confederation for the postage stamp province in the south of Manitoba. And the commissioners came and negotiated on behalf of the Queen for the ability to be present on the land. Now, having worked in Aboriginal law for a decade, I can say that in most cases the Crown has put forward the position that the treaty is a surrender of land, that Treaty 1 is a land cession treaty. And we use the term cede, release, and surrender if we look at the written text of the treaty. But if you go back to the written record and to the oral histories, and I say written record because there was a newspaper that recorded the treaty negotiations in 1871, nowhere in the discussion, including in the commissioners' speeches right at the front end that they recorded, was there ever a discussion of the words cede, release, and surrender. Nowhere in the treaty negotiations. So to use that as the foundation of our understanding or our story of treaty is a flawed premise. And so what I explore is, what does the treaty actually mean? What did the Anishinaabe and the Crown talk about in 1871? Well, they started it off by talking about relationship. They said, and the commissioners started their speeches by saying, the Queen, your great mother, she wants what's best for you. She wants to treat you equally with the other red children and with the white children. She wants to assure peaceful settlement. She wants you to be on this land, to choose agriculture and go to reserves if you want, but you can continue to hunt, trap, and fish in your territory. The commissioners said this, and the Anishinaabe understood that they were entering into relationship with the Queen and her children. And one beautiful example of how Anishinaabe law at that particular time may have informed how we saw things differently is that in British law, and that's the baggage that was coming with the commissioners, in British law we had hierarchy amongst children. We had children whose labor could be sold on the market. We had differentiation between male and female children, between the oldest and youngest in the family. No decision-making power, no legal identity to a child. Whereas from an Anishinaabe perspective, children were to be treated equally. There was none above or below the other. That a mother had obligations of love, kindness, caring to all of her children, and that each of them would be fostered in their independence. Although the mother would ensure that they would have a good life, she would foster their self-autonomy so that they could grow. They always had decision-making power, and they had legal autonomy and authority over their own decision-making. So very different. If you contrast those two systems of law that are at play in 1871, Anishinaabe law, live and well, fostered by the fur trade, we see that we've got two different understandings, two different stories of the same thing. What does that mean today? That means today we have an agreement to share in the land. That's what the Anishinaabe agreed to do with the settlers, the children of the Queen. So what do we do in 2017? Well, my vision, and I encourage you to discuss this today, we need to have real and informed dialogue. We need to start from places of sharing. We need to want to understand each other and want to be prepared to set aside all of the problems with what it is that we're discussing. For example, property and money and resource revenue sharing and past historical wrongs, and say, yes, those are part of informing our discussion, but we want to live in relationship and honor that relationship. And we want to be in a healthy relationship. I'll leave you with this thought. Canada was born of relationship with Indigenous people. And I don't think we can, at this point in time, this juncture, at 150 years, move away from that, but rather we should celebrate it. Chimengwech.
Stay for one question.
Wow. Merci, Aimé. Je pourrais t'écouter parler comme ça pendant des heures.
Thank you. I could listen
On
to
a
you
un
for
horaire. Par
hours,
contre,
but we
j'ai
have to get
beaucoup
move
aimé
on.
l'idée de
I like that
penser à cette
idea
génération
of
dans le
thinking
futur.
of
I think
these
it's
7
true that we have to
generations.
think 7 generations down. And I'm guessing your family heritage ou ton passé et ton lien de parenté avec Uriel,
Your
certainement
relationship
a
with
conversation
Uriel.
open. Is it? You've had discussions about him, I'm sure. So what would you say would be the mistakes maybe that we should avoid when it comes to our relationship between what we say Canadians and First Nations? What would be the one mistake we should avoid right now with what's happening?
I love that question. I think we should avoid coming to the discussion and the relationship from positions of rights and positions, essentially. I think that we need to work in open dialogue and be prepared to let go of some of our assumptions and some of the things we think we're entitled to, because that's going to keep us pretty far apart. And, you know, the image, to refer back to it, it tells the story of treaty, and what the elders will often say is that the treaty is forever. It's as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. And this represents that. As far as I know, all of those things are still happening. And if we're going to share, then we need to talk about how we share together in what one of the elders has often referred to as the plate that we eat from together, and to eat from that same plate rather than taking our share, turning our backs on each other, and walking in separate directions.